Cedric Ashbourne, the 30-year-old Duke of Ashbourne, ruled his vast English estate with unwavering discipline and a reputation that inspired both admiration and fear. Behind the stern expression that silenced crowded halls, however, lived a man who had once believed love was the greatest blessing God could grant. That belief began and ended with his 22-year-old wife, Lady Elara Whitmore, whose quiet grace and gentle heart had transformed the cold palace into a home. Unlike many noblewomen, Elara found joy in the smallest acts of kindness. She knew every servant by name, visited the kitchens to thank the cooks, carried blankets to sick stable boys during winter, and spent evenings reading stories to orphan children sheltered by the estate. The palace staff adored her, yet not everyone welcomed the warmth she brought to Ashbourne Manor. Among those who smiled while hiding poisoned intentions was Lady Vivian Hawthorne, a strikingly beautiful aristocrat whose charm concealed relentless ambition. She had long dreamed of becoming Duchess, and believed Elara stood between her and the life she deserved. Patiently, she wove a web of deceit, bribing servants, spreading whispered rumors, and planting doubts wherever she could. Every lie was carefully chosen, not to destroy Elara all at once, but to slowly erode Cedric's trust. Elara noticed the growing distance in her husband. The man who once sought her company after council meetings now buried himself in work. Their dinners became quiet. His smiles disappeared. When she reached for his hand, he often withdrew before realizing what he had done. Though her heart ached, she refused to believe their love could truly be broken by silence. One morning, Elara discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled her with overwhelming joy. She imagined Cedric lifting their baby into his arms, teaching their son to ride across the Ashbourne fields, or watching their daughter chase butterflies through the palace gardens. She decided to surprise him after the royal banquet that evening, hoping the child would heal the distance between them. Instead, the banquet became the darkest night of her life. As nobles gathered beneath glittering crystal chandeliers, the Duchess mother's priceless sapphire disappeared. Before confusion settled, Vivian stepped forward with practiced sorrow and claimed she had seen Elara leaving the family treasury. A palace servant, secretly paid by Vivian, produced the sapphire from inside Elara's private chamber. Gasps echoed through the grand hall. Before Elara could defend herself, another servant accused her of placing a strange powder into the Duke's evening wine. The accusations struck Cedric like thunder. Hurt, anger, and wounded pride overwhelmed reason. He stared at the woman he had loved with eyes clouded by betrayal, while Vivian stood nearby, pretending to plead for mercy on Elara's behalf. "I swear I've done none of this," Elara said, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry across the silent hall. "Please believe me." Cedric's jaw tightened. Every rumor of the past several months returned to him at once, each one strengthening the illusion that stood before him. His disappointment hardened into fury. "Throw her out," he barked. The command echoed through the chamber. 2 guards seized Elara before anyone dared question the Duke's order. She struggled only long enough to look into Cedric's eyes one final time, desperately hoping to find the husband she knew still hiding behind the rage. Instead, she found only cold certainty. As she was dragged across the polished marble floor, her wedding ring slipped from her trembling fingers and spun to Cedric's feet. He looked at it but never bent to retrieve it. Outside, heavy rain poured over the palace gates. The servants who had once admired their Duchess lowered their heads in helpless silence as Elara was pushed into an old carriage with nothing but the simple clothes she wore. She instinctively placed both hands over her stomach, protecting the tiny life growing inside her. Through tears, she whispered to her unborn child that no matter what happened, they would survive together. The carriage disappeared into the storm while Cedric remained standing inside the palace, convincing himself he had defended his family's honor. Neither of them knew that the lies separating them had only just begun, or that the words spoken in anger that night would haunt the Duke for years, long after the sound of the closing palace gates had faded into the rain. The carriage carrying Elara never reached the distant village marked on her exile papers. As fierce winds lashed the countryside, one frightened horse stumbled on the rain-soaked road, sending the carriage crashing into a shallow ditch. The driver fled in panic, believing no one could survive the accident. Injured and barely conscious, Elara lay beneath the pouring rain, one hand protecting the child growing inside her, while whispering a desperate prayer that her baby would live. Before dawn, an elderly widow named Agnes Rowan discovered the wreckage while gathering firewood. Though she possessed little more than a modest cottage and a compassionate heart, Agnes refused to leave the young woman behind. With the help of 2 neighboring farmers, she carried Elara home, tended her wounds for several days, and never once asked about the sorrow reflected in her tearful eyes. When Elara finally awoke, Agnes simply smiled and said, "Every soul deserves another morning." Months later, Elara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Oliver, promising as she held him for the first time that he would grow up surrounded by kindness instead of bitterness. Agnes became the grandmother neither of them had ever expected, filling the tiny cottage with laughter that slowly replaced memories of palace walls and broken promises. Life remained difficult. Money was scarce, winter was unforgiving, and every loaf of bread required sacrifice. Refusing to depend on charity forever, Elara learned the ancient craft of candle making from Agnes, whose late husband had once supplied candles to village churches. Night after night, the 2 women carefully melted wax, mixed fragrant herbs, and shaped elegant candles by hand, while Oliver slept peacefully beside the warm fireplace. At sunrise, Elara walked through busy market streets carrying a wooden basket filled with her creations. She never begged for pity. Instead, she greeted each passerby with quiet dignity and a gentle smile. "Please, buy my candles." Some ignored her without a glance. Others mocked her simple clothes. Yet many paused after seeing the care poured into every candle. They returned again and again, not only because the candles burned longer than any others, but because the young woman selling them treated every customer with sincere warmth. Whenever a poor mother confessed she could not afford one, Elara secretly slipped a candle into her basket anyway. If an elderly widower shivered through winter evenings, a candle mysteriously appeared outside his door before sunset. She delivered candles to the village church without accepting payment and often left fresh bread beside them, insisting someone else must have donated it. Few realized the generous stranger was the woman struggling hardest to survive. As Oliver grew older, he watched his mother work tirelessly from dawn until long after midnight. More importantly, he watched how she answered cruelty with patience. When rude merchants laughed at her humble stall, she wished them a pleasant day. When wealthy travelers bargained over a few coins, she thanked them for every purchase. She never allowed hardship to harden her heart. Within a few years, people began traveling from neighboring towns specifically to purchase Elara's handcrafted candles. Her delicate floral designs and soothing fragrances became treasured gifts for weddings, baptisms, and family celebrations. Customers affectionately called her the Lady of Light, believing every candle carried a warmth that no ordinary craftsman could create. One bitter winter evening, terrified screams shattered the peaceful village. Flames burst from the roof of the local orphanage, trapping several children inside as smoke swallowed the building. Villagers formed frantic lines with buckets of water, but the fire spread too quickly. Without hesitation, Elara rushed toward the burning building. Ignoring desperate warnings, she wrapped a soaked blanket around herself and disappeared through the smoke. One frightened little girl clung to her neck as Elara carried her outside. Moments later, she raced back inside for 2 young brothers hiding beneath a staircase. Her third rescue nearly cost her life when part of the roof collapsed behind her, but she emerged carrying the youngest child safely in her arms just before the entrance caved in. The villagers erupted in grateful tears. Several children refused to let go of her, calling her their angel. News of her courage spread far beyond the county, and noble families began ordering her candles after hearing stories of the humble woman whose compassion shone brighter than any flame. Far away at Ashbourne Manor, Cedric's life had become strangely empty. Vivian, now constantly at his side, reveled in luxury while treating servants with contempt. Laughter had vanished from the palace halls. Meals were silent. Gardens once blooming under Elara's care withered from neglect. Although Cedric possessed everything a powerful duke could desire, peace escaped him. One evening, while passing through a Christmas market during an official visit, he noticed a young woman selling handmade candles. Her soft voice drifted through the cold air. "Please, buy my candles." Cedric stopped as though struck by lightning. The words awakened a memory he had spent years trying to bury. A tearful face, a rain-soaked night, and the woman he had condemned without allowing her to prove her innocence. For the first time since her exile, doubt entered his heart. He bought a single candle, but as its gentle flame flickered that night, he found himself unable to sleep, haunted by the unsettling question he had never dared to ask. What if Elara had been telling the truth? 8 years passed, and the humble candle shop at the edge of the village became one of the most beloved places in the county. Every shelf displayed handcrafted candles shaped like roses, lilies, and tiny cottages, while their gentle fragrance welcomed everyone who stepped inside. Though many wealthy patrons offered Elara enough money to expand into a grand business, she refused to abandon the simple life that had taught her compassion. Every evening after closing the shop, she and Oliver packed baskets of bread, blankets, and candles for struggling families before quietly delivering them under the cover of darkness. Oliver, now an intelligent and kind-hearted 8-year-old, possessed his mother's gentle smile and his father's determined eyes. He knew nothing about the palace or the noble blood flowing through his veins. To him, Agnes was his grandmother, the candle shop was his kingdom, and his greatest dream was to grow into a man who could make his mother proud. One rainy afternoon, Elara fell ill after spending several days caring for sick children during a fever outbreak. Although she insisted she would recover quickly, Oliver noticed the shelves had emptied, and the family needed money to purchase more wax and medicine. Wanting to help, he filled a small basket with freshly made candles and walked to the nearest town marketplace. Standing beneath the pouring rain, the little boy smiled politely at strangers despite being soaked from head to toe. "Please, buy my candles. Mother worked all night making them." Most people hurried past without slowing their pace. Some apologized, while others barely noticed him. Oliver refused to give up. At that very moment, Duke Cedric Ashbourne's carriage entered the crowded square during an inspection of nearby estates. As the horses slowed through the market, the familiar words drifted through the rain. "Please, buy my candles." Cedric looked toward the small voice and saw the young boy standing alone, protecting the basket beneath his worn cloak. Something about the child unsettled him. The boy's calm expression, dark eyes, and quiet dignity reminded him of someone he had spent years trying to forget. Cedric stepped from his carriage. "Who made these?" he asked gently. "My mother," Oliver replied proudly. "She says every candle should bring hope to someone's home." Cedric purchased every candle in the basket. As Oliver carefully wrapped the final candle, a folded piece of parchment slipped from beneath the cloth. Cedric picked it up before the wind carried it away. It was an old charcoal sketch. The drawing showed a smiling young duke standing beside a blooming rose garden, holding the hand of a laughing woman. Although time had faded the paper, Cedric instantly recognized the artist. Only Elara had ever drawn him like that. His hands trembled. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "My mother keeps it for good memories," Oliver answered innocently. "She says some people become strangers, but we should never let hatred live in our hearts." Before Cedric could ask another question, Oliver politely thanked him and hurried home through the rain. The Duke remained frozen in the marketplace, staring at the sketch long after the child disappeared. That evening, Cedric ordered his most trusted captain to reopen the investigation into Elara's exile, despite fierce objections from Vivian. For the first time, he questioned every accusation that had destroyed his marriage. The investigation uncovered unsettling inconsistencies almost immediately. Financial records revealed that several servants who had testified against Elara had received large payments shortly after her banishment. One by one, frightened witnesses admitted they had lied under Vivian's orders. An elderly maid, burdened by years of guilt, finally confessed that she had watched Vivian hide the missing sapphire inside Elara's chamber before the royal banquet. Another servant revealed that the supposed poison found in the Duke's wine had been planted to create panic, not to harm him. Confronted with undeniable evidence, Vivian's carefully crafted mask finally shattered. In a crowded royal court, she admitted that jealousy had driven her to destroy the woman who stood between her and the title of Duchess. The confession echoed through the silent chamber. Cedric felt as though the floor had vanished beneath him. Every tear Elara had shed, every desperate plea, every promise of innocence, had been true. Unable to bear the weight of his own actions, Cedric removed the ducal signet ring from his finger and fell to his knees before the royal court. He confessed that his greatest failure had not been believing a lie, but refusing to trust the woman who had never once betrayed him. Vivian was stripped of her title, her wealth, and every privilege she had gained through deception before being permanently banished from the kingdom. Yet justice brought Cedric no peace. Late that night, he returned alone to the palace chapel, where he had once exchanged wedding vows with Elara. On the forgotten altar lay the wedding ring she had dropped the night he cast her out. For 8 long years, no one had moved it. Cedric picked up the ring with trembling hands and closed his eyes as regret overwhelmed him. At sunrise, carrying nothing except the ring and the faded sketch, the Duke left Ashbourne Manor with a single purpose. He would search every village, every road, and every corner of the kingdom until he found the woman whose forgiveness he no longer believed he deserved. Cedric's search lasted for months before it finally led him to the small village where the fragrance of handmade candles drifted through every street. Long before he reached the shop, he saw people smiling as they carried beautifully wrapped candles home, each speaking with admiration about the woman known as the Lady of Light. When he finally stood outside the modest storefront, he watched through the window as Elara laughed with Oliver, while teaching several orphan children how to make simple candles. The warmth inside that little shop was greater than anything he had felt in the grand halls of Ashbourne Manor. Unable to interrupt, Cedric quietly turned away. Instead of forcing his presence upon her, he rented a small cottage nearby and began helping the village in secret. He repaired broken roofs after storms, paid for medicine at the local clinic, restored the abandoned schoolhouse, and anonymously purchased food for struggling families. Every charitable donation carried only a simple note: "A friend who owes a great debt." Weeks later, Elara discovered who the anonymous benefactor truly was. She confronted Cedric outside the village church, where he was helping laborers replace a damaged stone wall. "You don't have to earn my forgiveness with gold," she said calmly. "I know," Cedric replied, his eyes lowered. "I'm trying to become the man I should have been before I ever asked for it." His words carried no excuses, only regret. Although Elara could see the sincerity in his heart, the wounds of the past were too deep to heal overnight. She asked him not to return to her home until she was ready. Cedric accepted her decision without protest, believing he had forfeited the right to demand anything from her. Oliver, however, remained curious about the quiet stranger, who always smiled whenever he visited the candle shop. Agnes eventually told Elara that a child deserved the truth, no matter how painful it might be. One evening, Elara gently explained everything to Oliver: the love she and Cedric had once shared, the lies that tore them apart, and the father who had never known his son existed. Oliver listened in silence. The next morning, he walked alone to Cedric's cottage. "Mother says good people admit when they're wrong," the boy said. "Are you trying to be good?" Cedric struggled to answer through tears. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying." Oliver stepped forward and hugged him. For the first time in 8 years, Cedric held his son. Before their family could begin healing, tragedy struck once more. The kingdom's annual Festival of Light invited Elara to illuminate the grand exhibition hall with thousands of her handcrafted candles. Villagers, nobles, merchants, and children gathered beneath glittering chandeliers to celebrate generosity and hope. As musicians played, a cracked support beam hidden within the old roof suddenly gave way. A massive crystal chandelier crashed into the center of the hall, igniting curtains and wooden decorations. Flames spread with terrifying speed, trapping dozens of frightened children behind collapsing debris. Panic swept through the crowd. Without hesitation, Elara rushed into the smoke toward the trapped children. Cedric saw her disappear inside and followed immediately. Working together as they once had in happier days, they carried terrified children through the flames, returning again and again despite the growing danger. During the final rescue, a burning timber crashed toward Oliver. Cedric threw himself forward, shielding his son with his own body as the heavy beam struck his shoulder. Ignoring the pain, he lifted the timber just long enough for Oliver and 2 younger children to crawl to safety. Moments later, part of the roof began collapsing around Cedric. This time it was Elara who refused to leave him behind. She fought through the smoke, wrapped his arm around her shoulder, and guided him toward a narrow service passage she had noticed while arranging candles earlier that morning. Together, with Oliver helping from the front, they escaped only seconds before the hall collapsed behind them. Outside, thousands watched as the family emerged safely through the smoke, hand in hand. In the days that followed, the kingdom honored Elara, Cedric, Oliver, and the brave villagers whose courage had saved countless lives. Yet the greatest moment came quietly, away from cheering crowds. Cedric returned to the little candle shop carrying only two things: Elara's wedding ring and the first candle she had ever made after beginning her new life. Agnes had secretly preserved it all those years. He placed both on the wooden counter. "I cannot erase the night I destroyed our happiness," he said softly. "But if you'll allow me, I want to spend every tomorrow protecting the light I once failed to see." Elara looked at the weathered candle, remembering the tears that had fallen into its warm wax on the lonely night she made it. Then she looked at the man before her. The proud duke who had once judged her without listening was gone. In his place stood a humble father who had learned that love required trust, sacrifice, and patience. Without speaking, she slipped her wedding ring back onto her finger. Oliver smiled, took one of their hands in each of his own, and gently joined them together. Rather than returning to Ashbourne Manor, the family chose a different future. Cedric transformed the palace into a hospital, orphanage, and school funded by the Ashbourne estate, while he and Elara built a peaceful home beside the candle workshop where hope had first returned to her life. Every winter, they hosted the Festival of Light, giving free candles, warm meals, clothing, and gifts to every family in need, ensuring no child faced the darkness alone. Years later, travelers crossing the county rarely spoke first of the powerful Duke of Ashbourne. Instead, they told the unforgettable story of a humble candle maker whose kindness illuminated an entire kingdom, a repentant duke who learned that forgiveness must be earned, and the little boy whose simple words, "Please, buy my candles," had led a broken family back to one another. And from that day forward, whenever a single candle was lit in the Ashbourne Valley, people remembered that even the smallest light could guide a lost heart home.